Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. The United Nations Security Council, it held its second meeting on the plight of Indian-occupied Kashmir last week since August 5th revocation. Now, the image of India has come a long way down from the world's biggest democracy to the revocation of Article 370 that essentially takes away semi-autonomy of the disputed state of Jammu and Kashmir, as well as imposing on it a brutal military crackdown, hundreds of cordon and search operations, thousands of illegal detentions and arrests, and a complete communication blackout at the expense of critically ill patients and others. In fact, today, Indian troops in their fresh act of state terrorism killed 3 Kashmiri youth in Shopian district. Now, Kashmir Media Service reported that Indian troops, they used heavy weapons and chemical gunpowder, killing 3 and also destroying a house during a cordon and search operation in Shopian district. Meanwhile, India continues ceasefire violations across the line of control. Now, according to official figures, 59 civilians, including women and children, have been killed in 2019 alone on Pakistan's side of the line. Now, these violations continue and cause the death of innocent civilians as a result of Indian troops' fire. Prime Minister Imran Khan, he's warned of the consequences. On Sunday, in fact, he tweeted that Pakistan will not continue to watch as India carries out military attacks along the line of control. Now, here's what he said. I want to make clear to India and the international community that if India continues its military attacks, killing civilians across the LOC, Pakistan will find it increasingly difficult to remain an inactive observer along the LOC. He also reiterated that the United Nations needs to intervene in the situation in occupied Kashmir, which is why they really welcomed the UNSC meeting. It is technically the third meeting because the one in December got deferred. Now, what we're looking to investigate today is what is the situation in Kashmir and where is it headed? What are the world leaders doing about it? 5 months since the abrogation of Article 370 and the continuous efforts by the Pakistani government in demanding world leaders to resolve the issue, where do we stand? So without further ado, let me introduce who we'll be speaking to. We'll start off the conversation with Mr. Nazir, Shawl, an activist and a Kashmiri activist, in fact, the chairman of South Asia Center for Peace and Human Rights. And he's joining us from Islamabad. Welcome to the conversation, Mr. Shawl. If I can start with you, especially in light of the UNSC meeting. Now, it's a closed-door meeting, of course, and it's highly confidential. But in your opinion, considering that is the third one in the span of 5 months that has taken place, what are your sentiments at the moment in terms of where this conflict is heading?
Thank you for taking me online and discussing the disturbing and concerning situation in the occupied Jammu and Kashmir. I think in order to understand Kashmir's situation, we need to contextualize the present Indian regime, which is classified by all sane people as a supremacist, fascist, and a regressive government, and it has imposed a blackout and a lockdown on the people of Jammu and Kashmir, who have been deprived of their freedom of expression, who have been deprived of their movement, and who have in fact been held for the last 6 months in a prison. And Kashmir, the paradise, has been converted into a big jail. As far as the international response to this Indian fascism in Kashmir is concerned, I would say that we are really happy in a way that the world media has picked up the disturbing stories from the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and most of the international newspapers and news channels have highlighted the trauma the people of Kashmir are suffering. And in this backdrop, if we look at the conduct of recent meetings by the UN Security Council, 2 of them consecutively in the past 5 months, this is also a heartening development that at least a concern is being shown by the world powers towards this disturbing situation. And one more thing that needs to be understood is that India has started a policy of persecution of minorities, and Indian minorities are also being threatened. Particularly, the Muslims of India have been, subjected to a lot of problems. And recently, the citizens registration and other ordinances that were passed by the Indian Parliament are also a matter of concern. And the whole of India at this time is reverberating with one slogan, that this regressive regime is imposing a fascist doctrine on all of them. And
right.
Here I would also like to say that ever since the present government came to power in India, they started a policy in Kashmir right from 2014. And it has been very crisply, what we call, enunciated by International Tribunal for Peace, and wherein they say that India pursues a policy for disciplining the people of Kashmir by death, and this death is distributed through extrajudicial means. And this policy continues, and this policy is also a matter of great concern.
It is of great concern, but hold that thought, Mr. Shawl. We will get to the next point also, but here let me elaborate a little more in terms of what you're talking about, the world leaders, the news reports that are coming out from international newspapers about the situation in Jammu and Kashmir. When reports come out of India on the January 9th, in fact, took 15 foreign diplomats, including the US ambassador to India, and they were taken on this guided tour to the occupied valley to show them that, as India calls it, life was getting back to normal there. Yet at the same time, what's interesting is that in that very state, the political leadership is still behind bars.
You see, recently, yes, India is attempting to hide its crimes in Kashmir, and they are arranging these conducted tours, and not only the one that you referred, but there was earlier also a group of diplomats. A group of diplomats was taken to, not only diplomats, but members of the European Parliament was also taken. That was also a conducted tour. But they were not allowed to interact independently with the people. And so it was a farce. Even this tour that was recently has been concluded, even in this was a military operation, and it was all done, all the briefings were done by the military personnel, and some of the persons whom they were allowed to meet, that was also all conducted program. So I don't suppose that it has created any impact, but it has had a negative impact on the Indian policy, which is being pursued in Kashmir.
Okay, Mr. Shawl, stay there. Let me add another analyst to this conversation. We have with us Mr. Rejiv Desai joining us from Delhi. Welcome, Mr. Desai. The conversation right now is about the trip that 15 ambassadors were taken to Jammu and Kashmir, and what the Congress has called it, the Congress party has called it a guided tour. In fact, there were reports that European Union ambassadors refused to go because they wanted free and easy access to civilians on the ground and didn't want to be in a sort of a very guided tour situation, which is exactly what happened. Now, what do you make of this, considering at the same time we are seeing the political leadership of the valley, which is still detained?
So here's the thing. The trouble we've had with this government is that they, for example, in Kashmir, because by taking all those ambassadors there, they have simply signaled that they think of the Kashmir issue as a public relations problem, not as a problem of their making, which was scrapping of 370, splitting up the state. All of that can be handled through public relations, and that's how they're approaching the problem. Just if I can just wander off for a minute into this new citizenship bill, it's the same thing. They perpetrated a huge injustice on on the people of India. And now, when people are protesting, they're calling counter rallies, organized counter rallies, as though it's a PR problem. So I think this is where we are running into a lot of trouble with this government. They don't seem to understand the difference between the consequences of their action and how it gets reported in the media.
Just on that, you mentioned the CAA and the protests that have been taking place for weeks. The head of the BJP government in West Bengal, he came out and said this statement that he essentially threatened to shoot and jail people who protested against the new citizenship law. That has triggered quite a lot of a reaction also. Is that also what you would say a PR failure on part of the BJP government?
The PR failure of the government. I am saying that the government sees all these things as a PR problem, not as real problems, you see.
Right.
That there's a big difference. So they think that no matter what happens, what matters is how it's reported in the media.
Right.
So they virtually control the television media, virtually control it. And whatever little independent media are left, they want to, curtail it. Now, social media, that's why they've shut down the internet in Kashmir. That's why, they've enacted a law in Delhi which allows the Delhi police and the lieutenant governor to imprison somebody without any charges for 6 months.
Right.
They've lost their marbles completely.
Right. And this idea that maybe, as the Congress leader Shashi Tharoor recently said, that if the Union Minister, the Home Minister, Mr. Amit Shah, Mr. Narendra Modi, if they just take back, they announced that they will not carry out the NRC exercise, that all of this could be eliminated, this kind of turmoil that they're seeing in India. Do you think that's even a remote possibility that they might be reconsidering it?
No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, today they are busy welcoming a new person to be the president of the BJP, he's taking over from Mr. Shah. So, they are living in some separate planet and we are living in another galaxy. That's the way it works out.
So it's disturbing when this reality is in complete, contrast to their reality is a complete contrast to what is actually unfolding on the world stage, because it seems that very rapidly the BJP-led government is bringing down what was once a very sort of coveted position India had on the world stage, especially with this UNSC meeting. Now, these are closed-door meetings, but still, if the UN Permanent Representative of India is talking about it being a win, when essentially it is built around trying to assess the situation on the ground so that a better solution can be come up with, which is why it's kept closed door. Do you think that this is going to bite India back if they don't curb the kind of enthusiasm they're showing to this UNSC meet?
I just want to say two things on that. One is that these spontaneous protests of young people, of women, of children, of older women, just sitting out in this cold, relative cold in Delhi for days together in one part of Delhi. These women have been sitting out for almost 35 days. They've started that in Lucknow. They've started that in different cities. So, and I think the very fact that at all these gatherings, they read the preamble to the Indian Constitution and stuff like that. I think that's a very heartening sign that the people want to take things back and, focus on the Constitution and not let things ride the way they did for the 5 years that these guys ran amok. On the international front, they come to the whole issue as a public relations problem. When they were being accused of corruption in the Rafale deal, they got the French ambassador, some minister to say, no, everything's fine. Well, if you're buying multi-billion-dollar worth of weapons from a country, they'll say anything to make sure that the deal goes through.
Right.
And, they're so silly. They think that they've done their little bit. They've got the coverage and the positive coverage in the press, and all's well. When it's not, nothing's well. In fact, the latest reports on the economy are even worse than anybody ever imagined.
They're even worse than anyone imagined. Mr. Desai, hold that thought. Let me just come back to you quickly, Mr. Shawl, on this, the concerns you had, not only about what is unfolding in Jammu and Kashmir, but the overall sentiment across India challenging the government's bit at the moment with the new CAA that was passed right at the end of 2019. But tell us, as a Kashmiri activist who has seen this firsthand, all of this unfolding right now, whether it's the UNSC meet or the situation within India, what are the sentiments like on the ground of Kashmiris themselves who are facing this communication lockdown and curfews for the past 5 months?
As far as the people of Jammu and Kashmir are concerned, they are determined to resist, and they know that they have been suffering, and their suffering will come to an end only when they realize their right to self-determination. But here I would like to say that we need to also contextualize the emerging scenario. And the emerging scenario is that India is planning a genocide. And this genocide has different dimensions. The cultural genocide is also going on ground. And, the school system has been what we call, they are introducing Sanskrit and Hindi, and they are what we call as has been said by Bipin Rawat, that they are instituting de-radicalization camps. Right. And all these things point to only one thing, that India is planning a genocide. And the world needs to take a note of it. And the world also needs to know that there has been a doctrine that has been practiced by India ever since it took power, the BJP took power in 2014, and it is called Double Doctrine. And one of the important elements of this Double Doctrine is to change the demography of the state. And
I'll come back to you, Mr. Desai. We talked about the civilian we talked about earlier how many civilians have been killed in these ceasefire violations across the LOC. Now, this in itself, whether it's the Prime Minister of Pakistan tweeting about it, or hearing the Indian Army Chief talking about, taking over Azad Jammu and Kashmir, this all is creating a very clear picture of regional tensions. These are nuclear-armed states here. And while it is being appreciated that the UNSC is taking this issue seriously, is that message coming across of what is about to unfold if this isn't stopped?
See, unfortunately, the Americans are caught up in their own little piece of madness. But I think there are enough people in the United States, and I know that country better than most others, who are completely aware of the situation. I think certainly in Western Europe, people are aware of the situation. And I'm fairly certain the Japanese Prime Minister himself canceled the visit, that people in Japan, China, and Asia also are aware of this madness that's going on. So as far as, if I can just interject one thing here about this doctrine that the other speaker referred to. Mm-hmm. Well, this guy who is the national security advisor, he's essentially a cop. I mean, he doesn't have any larger vision of anything. And in fact, that is part of the problem of the entire BJP. They don't seem to have a larger vision. They only live and die on the next day's headlines. So they sent 36, they've got a plan to send 36 ministers to Jammu and Kashmir. To do what? I have no idea, except to see headlines next day in the papers that the BJP is making, the government is making an effort to woo the population of Kashmir, but they're long gone. Anybody who's got even the slightest amount of sense understands that the alienation is really severe, and some very, very, very determined efforts will have to be made to get to the roots of that alienation, to address it, and to bring them back into the fold. Now they've only been in power for less than a year, so who knows? They've got 4 more years. Right. But this is not going very well for them either. So I think the people in India have lost all faith in this government, and they've become not only the laughing stock, but people are beginning to look at them as though it's like a bunch of sort of retards playing around with nuclear weapons. So
right, but which is, of course, in itself very concerning. Something, if you're saying the citizens of India are seeing it that way, then obviously the world leaders could be very cognizant that they're playing with fire as they bide their time. Here, let me welcome Lieutenant General Ghulam Mustafa, an analyst joining us from Lahore. General, the UNSC meet, and it was a closed-door meeting. And as we understand it, it is to understand the situation in Jammu and Kashmir better, to come up with solutions and to also come up with a plan if things go south. But here we're talking about two nuclear-armed states. I mean, as the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, talked about, that we are not going to be silent observers if these ceasefire violations continue or if some rash move is made by India. It seems like this situation, once again, is coming to a boil very quickly.
Ayza, much that I like to think so, and I like to believe that the world leadership and the international community generally is coming to grip the situation, what is happening to the people in Jammu and Kashmir. There are two things we must understand. Knowing things is one thing, doing something about it to bring about the change, bring about what is actually required to be done there are two different things. And there's a lot of distance that has to be covered between the two. Is the world community ready to cover that distance? Or is it, to make a start towards that? That is where I have my doubts. I have my doubts because so far, after about 6 months of continuous oppression of those people, the world has done nothing. Nothing, zilch, zero. Much that I would like to believe that the senior voices in India are rising and they're creating this kind of a difficulty for both in nothing. Let's not be,
right, but General, I agree with you. Even the UNSC meeting that took place last week, there was no official statement yet that was issued, but the Chinese ambassador, Zhang Jun, he walked out and he talked to reporters there. And he said, when he was asked if anything was, what was the conclusion, any decision was made, he said, and here, let me just read out his quote, "I am sure the meeting will be helping both parties to understand the risk of further escalation and will encourage them to approach each other and to have dialogue and to seek means to seek solutions through dialogue. And I think that will be helpful." This is what he said, end quote. Do you think that's even a remote possibility that this is going to happen anytime soon?
Ayza, that actually is the whole issue. It boils down to that we should talk to India. Talk to India about what? We have talked to India not once.
Right.
Starting with Zulfikar Bhutto, I think we had over 6 to 7 rounds of discussions about Kashmir. And then we came up with a single agreement. And Pakistan stuck to the bilateralism, whatever it meant for Pakistan. Frankly speaking, when India refuses to talk about Kashmir totally when you are on the negotiating table, and Pakistan has no way of forcing India to accept what is the reality on ground, then how do you talk to people like that?
Right. So
everybody is talking to each other. How can you talk to each other when other parties are ready to listen to you?
See, that's the conundrum there. Mr. Desai, your take on this, if the dialogue is not an option on the table, because we're talking about a government right now in India that even refuses to acknowledge that on the ground what is unfolding as a result of the application of Article 370, it is not just, they're not recognizing is that this indigenous movement is now getting worse. Like, what happens when they lift a curfew? So they didn't want international intervention at all. They call it an internal matter. So now it's not even a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. What do you think are the options left on the table for the Indian government?
Well, the Indian government, I don't think they see much beyond what happens in tomorrow's headlines. No, I think the real issue here is that there is a consolidation of opinion in India, and it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks all over the world, but as long as now people in India are beginning to believe, and this nuclear thing is still not come out that significantly, but really a lot of people do understand that this is playing with fire and with two nuclear-armed states, where we should be talking about arms limitations and things like that, the whole thing seems to escalate. But I think the people of India are now seized of the dangers of this government. And I'm not an astrologer. I'm not a palm reader or anything of that sort. But I do think that the solution lies with the people of India. And and that sounds grandiose, I know, and I'm not a politician or anything. But I think once this thing spreads more and more rapidly, I think it may take a life of its own, and I see absolutely no end to it unless and until the people of India stand up. All these protesters stand up and challenge the government. They're challenging it now on a citizenship law, but eventually they're going to have to challenge them on grounds of their own personal safety and nobody wants the big cities of India obliterated and vice versa, I'm sure. So I think that eventually I think the people of India will speak. And
so it's up to the people. It's up to the people of India, and we're already seeing the beginning of a movement. It seems standing up to the government, especially in light of the laws passed within India. Thank you so much, Mr. Rejiv Desai. You were joining us from Delhi. Coming back to you, General. Now, when the abrogation of Article 370 was passed, August 5th. We saw a lot of countries speak up against it. They were very concerned. We saw China, we saw Turkey, Malaysia, Iran, Germany, and Finland. Besides, of course, the various other parliaments of different countries that spoke up about the kind of human rights violations that were taking place after August 5th. But does it concern you that we've seen when the first UNSC meeting was called last year that the UK seemed very ambivalent on how it wanted to respond to India's stance, but now it seems they're again, siding with India's issue that it's an internal matter. So they've been won over.
Frankly, I had no doubt right from the day one that this is something which has been sanctioned. And the sanctioning authorities, as I call them, is United States of America, Great Britain, and France. These three countries have totally backed India right from day one. Had they not backed India, things could have been very different. India took the step at that time that it took. It was only because these powers supported it. UK, two-timing is something, a term that probably is not applicable to UK. They are operating at a number of different levels, and for them, they are the ones who created this issue. If they have not created the issue, there wouldn't be the kind of massacre that is going on. And now, deliberately siding with India, deliberately supporting Modi, deliberately supporting all those powers which are trying to prop up India as the bulwark against whatever they think that has to be done in this region. I think Pakistan would be living in fool's paradise if they start believing anybody, frankly, anybody who says something to the extent that something has to be done about Kashmir. What has to be done about the Kashmir? Can you allow this kind of a population, this kind of atrocities being committed somewhere in Europe? Can we ever believe that? Right. The world will keep quiet?
No, but I get your point. But then what is lined up in the future? I mean, I'm not asking you to predict, but what options are there? What realistic route are we looking at when it comes to not just Jammu and Kashmir, but the way the BJP government is forcing its agenda on all Indian citizens, despite the fact that these are one of the biggest protests we've seen?
But have we linked it to? Has Pakistan been able to link the two? Even yesterday I was hearing some of the commentators saying that India's internal affair and let India sort it out. Is the world alive to the whole what is happening in India? What is being done by what I call the Brahman Zionists? My fear is that we are heading into what people are now beginning to realize, that push comes to shove when Pakistan is being pushed to the wall. At some point in time, Pakistan will retaliate. And that retaliation is not going to be according to Pakistan's plans. There is going to be reaction. And reactions are never well thought out. And the results could be catastrophic. That is what
that is the biggest concern. That is the biggest concern right now. What we were discussing here, but we've already run out of time. Lieutenant General Ghulam Mustafa, thank you for joining us here on Newswire. And we end that note with his thoughts here that Pakistan is being pushed against the wall, and if it does respond, it will be a reaction to the kind of activities taking place in these past 5-6 months. The tensions are brewing high between the two nuclear armed states. We'll leave it at that. and we'll take a quick short break. We'll be right back with more news and analysis. Welcome back to Newswire with me, Ayza Omar. Now, after 18 years of war and one failed peace talk later, it seems that the US is finally at the cusp of securing some kind of a peace deal with the Afghan Taliban. While speaking to a Pakistani newspaper, the Afghan Taliban spokesperson, Mr. Suhail Shaheen, he said on Friday that the Taliban had agreed to reduce military operations so to provide a safe environment for the withdrawal of foreign troops from Afghanistan. And talks with the US were now being focused on what the date will be on signing the agreement. Now, Suhail Shaheen also said that the purpose of bringing down these military activities by the Taliban is to provide a safe environment, in fact, for the foreign forces to leave Afghanistan. Now, he also added that there is no agreement on ceasefire, and the Taliban's move is just to reduce military operations. The Taliban have indicated that the agreement would lead to a conversation with the Afghan government, an intra-Afghan dialogue, including with Ashraf Ghani-led Kabul administration. And these negotiations could possibly begin over the question of whether or not there would be a nationwide ceasefire. But the Afghan government spokesperson, Mr. Siddiqui, he said that the Afghan people will not accept this, and they reject the Taliban proposal of reduced violence in the region, and they just want complete ceasefire. So we will be also investigating Pakistan's angle here, who has been playing its role in the peace talks. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has talked about how it is a very volatile time and that the Afghan Taliban, they believe, are showing willingness to reduce violence. But at the same time, as Mr. Shah Mahmood Qureshi said, that the US shouldn't be in any haste to withdraw. They still would want to stay on. Now, there's a lot to discuss here, so without further ado, let me introduce our guests who are joining us. We have Lieutenant General Amjad Shoaib, an analyst joining us from Islamabad. And also we have Professor Herbert Reginbogin, an analyst and professor of international relations and international law, joining us from Washington, D.C. here. Lieutenant General Amjad Shoaib, if I can begin with you, especially in light of what Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has talked about. Now, this, of course, without any kind of confusion for Pakistan, it's very important that there is peace across the border here. But with the situation that is evolving, is there concern within Pakistan that the move that the US is trying to make here is more about a short-term solution, and that there could be a very realistic possibility that the US troops on the ground might not be there in numbers that would help in the long term?
I think to such time we know the exact details and timelines of withdrawal. One may not be able to really comment on it, but I have a feeling that it's not the sudden withdrawal of the troops that we are envisaging. There will be perhaps a proper plan and a gradual reduction of troops in Afghanistan, and still having strong bases on ground like Bagram base, etc., from where you can generate a lot of firepower, aerial firepower and ground firepower, and you also have a strong intelligence presence there. So I think it will be a sort of organized affair that we are now envisaging. Moreover, the ground fighting in any case was being done by the Afghan forces for quite some time now. The American ground forces, as we have been told, were there to train the Afghan army and nothing more. They were just supplementing the Afghan army's efforts with their firepower, with their helicopters and air power and the ground missile force, etc. So that way that firepower will still be available. And those who are there to train the Afghan army perhaps will be withdrawn, and maybe some of those who were just providing depth to the Afghan operations. So that way I think it will not make any material difference as far as the operations are concerned. But at the same time, if the Afghan Taliban are saying that they are going to reduce the violence and perhaps their military activities, that will also, I think, have a salutary effect on the whole situation. You will not require those many troops to fight, to continue fighting on ground once these hostilities are reduced. So
Okay.
I think in a way it's a good development, and let's see how it really comes out.
Okay. So, Professor Regan, coming to you, the Taliban said that now they are looking at a date on when this will be signed, this agreement will be signed. What is your understanding on that there is a draft that's already ready and it's right now just a point of when this agreement will be signed?
I think you have to take this into three considerations. One, the reason for this abrupt, and I say abrupt, end of the war for the United States involvement in Afghanistan. This is a political reason, elections. President Trump has made it very clear he wants to withdraw American forces from abroad. Afghanistan would serve his political calculation. Two, what does this mean for the Afghan government, for which the United States has originally come to protect the integrity of the country in 2003, following the Taliban protecting extremists, Al-Qaeda and others. And this is, of course, certainly a part of that agreement that is being discussed, that the Taliban will not protect such extremists. But that doesn't mean that they can't be used against the government of the recognized government of Afghanistan. And thirdly, is there another issue about pending problems with the ICC, which is something long-term, and has another discussion about what the United States did in the year 2003 to 2004. But I think another fourth issue here is what ramifications does this have for extremists in the region? The encouragement that they have now overthrown, and they would use those words, brought the United States away, just like Russia in the 1980s. What would that be, the geopolitical security issue for the extremists in that country?
Professor Reginbogin, do you also have concerns that this meeting, these talks, this round of talks, once they convened after the earlier ones which President Trump called off, are you concerned that these are, like you mentioned about the elections right now, the troop withdrawal is also, focused on that, but that this solution that they're coming up with the Taliban, the Afghan Taliban right now, is not exactly geared for as a long-term solution?
It is. It's a gamble. I mean, you can say I would make a first gesture of trust, and if a ceasefire is not there in place, but a reduced amount of conflict, this just gives still the ability of the Taliban to attack when it finds an opportunity. I'm skeptical about the long-term value of this type of agreement.
Right, because they've both shown, and let me get your comments on this, General Amjad, because they've both shown, the Afghan Taliban and the US, that they are very unpredictable. The way President Trump called off the last time the peace talks, they were so close, it seemed, according to the US Special Envoy Al-Khalilzad, to a peace agreement, even from what we were hearing from the Taliban spokespeople. But it seems almost like a very big risk that it might be great on paper at the moment, but is this going to last even after the President Trump's tenure is over, the elections are over, and the new government is in the US? Is this a long-term solution the way it is being constructed out?
I don't think it's a long-term solution. Ultimate solution is to be found out by the Afghans themselves. And I think America feels that they are bogged down. I mean, Pakistan is the only country which can be pushed around and the blames can be dumped on Pakistan. But I think the American administration knows it very well that Afghan Taliban are no longer isolated commodity. Mm-hmm. They have patronization from Russia, they have patronization from Iran, and they have a political support from and understanding with Beijing also. So Pakistan is in no position to really do anything for the Taliban, except that we have their families around. Most of them, they're keeping their families because we have the refugees in Pakistan, and perhaps that is the only button that we can press. But otherwise,
But the concerns that Pakistan has had have been, especially when these tensions in the Middle East between US and Iran have gone through the roof in the past 1 month. Islamabad was concerned that, this could take away from what was being seen as a, progressing peace talks. Now that concern, and of course, if the US withdraws in haste, it could be a repeat of the 80s once again. I mean, these concerns still stand. We might not have a bargaining chip, but we will be on the losing end if any of this is how it unfolds.
It is something closer to that. See, during 80s, we didn't have a proper government in Afghanistan. Today we have, although this government doesn't have much of it within the Afghan territory, but still there is a government. But in 80s, we never had any government and there was no semblance of any Afghan army also. Today we have some Afghan troops also, not perhaps they don't have that kind of morale, but still they are there.
Okay.
So there is a big difference. But at the same time, the Americans, I think they are leaving because of the war weariness. It's not a political decision alone that there's a pressure also on the Trump administration that they must be withdrawn. After all, you have spent so much of money and you have not been able to gain anything. And you've also suffered many casualties, over 2,500 casualties dead and then many wounded people also. On the other hand, see, if it was the intention that you don't want to keep your troops abroad, why have you been pumping in troops into the Middle East and a huge presence of naval ships in Arabian Sea. So this build-up is there because the financial burden is being borne by the Gulf states. So you are enjoying, your troops are there, and somebody else is paying for their presence because you have created, let's say, scare of Iranian expansionism. And because of that, those people, they want some kind of protection for the United States. And the Gulf countries are paying for the troops that America is keeping there. So there is no fight going on. Somebody else is paying. So you can bring in more troops in Iraq.
Right.
You can bring in more troops in Saudi Arabia. You can bring more troops to Qatar. So that is what you are doing. But here, I think it's the war weariness. You are tired now. That tiredness is now apparent. You have spent so much of money, you have suffered so many casualties, you want to leave, and you want to leave it in a bit of disorder. That is what I'm trying to bring out, that it's not a permanent solution. See, unless and until you have a complete peace in Afghanistan, where the Taliban have already become part of the broad-based government, how can you leave? But now that you have some kind of intention of leaving, with whatever agreement you can ultimately forge with the Taliban, definitely you leave it in a hurry and there'll be a bit of chaos. Taliban would like to capitalize on the absence of American troops and try to gain ground in Afghanistan.
Now, Professor Reginbogin, we're running out of time, so I'm going to just address this question here. There are lots other that I want to talk to you about, especially in light of whether the Afghans are, even after 18 years of war, even longer, more like 40 years, there has been conflict in this region, are even prepared to take on a government they know how to run a government, or, they don't know anything besides fighting or not even maybe building roads. I mean, this has been a very long conflict. And while it seems, whether it's short-term or long-term, some kind of agreement is in the works here, just a few days away it seems, but the Afghan government is not happy. It's not happy with the Taliban's proposal. Are you concerned that this might be the spanner in the works of an actual sort of truce and de-escalation of violence in the region?
I think if I understand your question correctly, the Afghan government is not on the table. It's on the menu. And as such, if you want stability in what would be characterized as a failed state by some, then it would be the international community's responsibility to come in with other partners which are agreeable to the Taliban, to the government. You have a responsibility if you've already come to a country and you have countless tragedies over so endless amount of time. And I'm sure the United States would like to see its troops back home, and that is important, and limit such exposure in the future. But it has also a responsibility to all in that country and to the communities in the region to assure there is stability. Is that what you're going to achieve with this agreement?
Okay, Professor Reginbogin, thank you so much. Us from Washington, D.C., and Lieutenant General Amjad Shoaib, who was with us from Islamabad. Thank you for your analysis there. And just on a sort of closing note, let me also mention that the U.S. point person, the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for South Asian Affairs, Alice Wells, she's currently in Pakistan on a 4-day tour, on a 4-day visit. And on the agenda is not just the India-Pakistan tensions over Jammu and Kashmir, but also the very important matter of Afghanistan. So what can we learn from her meeting? We'll find out, and we'll keep you updated with Newswire tomorrow. That's when we'll see you next. Till then, goodbye.